What happens when a young black boy faces relentless bullying at an elite school simply because he doesn't fit the mold of privilege? Jacob Miller, a hard-working farmer's son, walked into Westfield High with muddy boots, only to be mocked by the wealthy students and publicly humiliated by his teacher, Miss Whitmore.
But when his grandfather, a powerful figure in the agricultural industry, arrives by helicopter to confront the injustice, the tides begin to turn. Stay tuned to witness how one act of defiance can challenge deep-rooted prejudice and change everything. Jacob Miller was a 13-year-old black boy who stood out like a sore thumb at Westfield High, a school renowned for its elite status. While shiny sports cars lined the entrance and students stepped out in their polished uniforms and designer backpacks, Jacob arrived in his faded jeans, muddy boots, and an old, worn-out backpack. His appearance was a stark contrast to the privileged children around him, and he felt the contemptuous glances of his peers as he walked through the hallways. Whispers followed him, filled with derision. Why did they even let someone like him in? As he navigated the crowded hall, Jacob was acutely aware of the judgment he faced daily. He clenched his lips, trying to ignore the laughter that erupted from a group led by Ethan Carter, a blond boy with sharp blue eyes and a smug smile. Ethan was the son of a real estate mogul, raised with everything except compassion. As Jacob approached, Ethan blocked his path, feigning surprise. "Oh, who's this? A farmer who wandered into the world of the educated?" The group erupted into laughter, the sound echoing cruelly off the walls. Jacob took a deep breath, suppressing his anger and hurt. He knew from experience that confronting Ethan would only make things worse. Yet, when Ethan pushed against his shoulder, Jacob stood firm. He met Ethan's gaze without fear, an unexpected calmness washing over him. For a brief moment, the laughter ceased, the tension hanging heavy in the air. But just as quickly the bell rang, signaling the end of the confrontation. Jacob turned away, retreating toward his history class, unaware of the deeper humiliation that awaited him. Entering the classroom, Jacob took his usual seat at the back, where he felt a semblance of safety. The front rows were filled with the elite students, those who had never known the meaning of hard work. Miss Whitmore, his teacher, soon entered the room, her presence commanding and cold. She scanned the classroom with disdain, her eyes lingering on Jacob for just a moment before she began her lesson on the American Civil War. "Jacob," she called out, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Do you know what this war was about?" The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Jacob felt his heart race, anxiety flooding his mind as he struggled to find an answer. Before he could respond, Miss Whitmore mocked him. "Oh, I forgot. Maybe you don't care about American history after all. Your ancestors never learned it, did they?" The laughter erupted again, cruel and mocking, and Jacob's face burned with humiliation. He clenched his fists, fighting against the urge to shout back that he knew American history better than anyone in that room. Instead, he remained silent, swallowing the shame that threatened to overflow. Miss Whitmore continued, unrelenting in her cruelty, reminding him that he didn't belong in a place like Westfield High. As he quietly packed his books, Jacob stood up, chairs scraping against the floor, breaking through the laughter that filled the room. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, surprising himself and everyone around him. Jacob's resolve surprised even Miss Whitmore, who stepped closer, her expression hardening. "If you don't want to be laughed at, then prove it," she said, her voice icy. In that moment, Jacob felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, the eyes of his classmates boring into him. But he also felt something else, an ember of defiance igniting within. He took a deep breath and walked out, leaving the classroom behind, determined to reclaim his dignity. Jacob's heart raced as he exited the classroom, the laughter of his classmates fading behind him. The humiliation he had just endured felt like a heavy shroud draped over his shoulders, but beneath it, a flicker of determination began to grow. He had always been the quiet one, the boy who endured the taunts and jeers without response. But today felt different. Today he had stood up, not just for himself, but for all those who had faced similar scorn. As he walked down the hall, Jacob felt the stares of his peers, but this time they were different.
Some looked on in confusion, others with a hint of respect. The whispers were still there, but they no longer held the same power over him. He had reclaimed a part of himself, and that spark of defiance ignited a fire within him. Meanwhile, in the history classroom, Miss Whitmore sat in stunned silence after Jacob's departure. The laughter had died down, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Students exchanged glances, unsure of how to react to the unexpected confrontation. Some felt a twinge of guilt for having joined in on the mockery, while others were simply bewildered by Jacob's bravery. Ethan Carter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his earlier confidence shaken. He had never seen Jacob stand up to anyone, let alone challenge a teacher. The power dynamic that had once worked in his favor was shifting, and he could feel it. The laughter that had once come so easily now felt hollow, and a sense of unease settled over the room. Outside, Jacob found himself in the schoolyard, the sun shining brightly overhead. He took a moment to breathe, letting the warmth wash over him. He thought of his grandfather, James Miller, and the strength he had instilled in him. Jacob knew that he had to do more than just walk away from humiliation. He had to fight for his place in this world. The next day, news of the incident spread like wildfire throughout Westfield High. In the cafeteria, students were buzzing with whispers about Jacob's defiance. Some recounted the story with exaggerated details, turning it into a spectacle, while others began to question the fairness of the treatment he received. Jacob's actions had sparked something in the student body, a flicker of awareness that perhaps things needed to change. As Jacob walked through the halls, he noticed a few students nodding at him, offering silent support. He felt a strange mix of emotions, pride, fear, and hope. It was clear that the tide was beginning to turn, but he knew this was only the beginning of a long journey. Back in the classroom, Miss Whitmore was grappling with the fallout of her words. She had always prided herself on her authority, but now she felt the weight of judgment from her students. The confidence she once exuded was replaced by a sense of vulnerability. Jacob's stand had not only challenged her actions, but had also forced her to confront her own biases. As the days passed, Jacob continued to stand tall, refusing to let the past define him. He had realized that respect is not given, it is earned through courage and resilience. The whispers in the hallway slowly shifted from mockery to acknowledgement. Students who once laughed at him now hesitated, unsure of how to react to the boy who had dared to stand up for himself. Jacob's journey was no longer just about facing the bullies. It had become a movement, a shift in the dynamics of Westfield High, where silence was no longer the safest option. The seeds of change had been planted, and Jacob was determined to nurture them, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt out of place. The following day, the atmosphere at Westfield High was charged with anticipation. Jacob stood at the entrance, heart pounding, as he scanned the parking lot. He had no idea how his grandfather's arrival would change everything. Just as the bell rang, a sleek black helicopter descended from the sky, creating a whirlwind of dust and excitement. Students rushed outside, eyes wide with disbelief as the helicopter landed right in the middle of the football field, an unprecedented sight at their school. As the doors swung open, Jacob's grandfather, James Miller, stepped out, exuding an air of authority and confidence. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he looked every bit the successful entrepreneur he was. The whispers among the students grew louder, with many recognizing him as a prominent figure in the Texas agricultural industry. He was not just a farmer, he was a legend, known for his contributions to sustainable farming and his rise from humble beginnings. Jacob felt a surge of pride as he watched his grandfather approach the main school building. The sheer weight of his presence commanded attention, and even Ethan Carter, who had once reveled in his power, looked visibly shaken. The roles had reversed, and for the first time, Jacob felt the thrill of being on the winning side. Inside the principal's office, the atmosphere was tense. Principal Richardson, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, stood rigidly next to Miss Whitmore, who appeared pale and uneasy. James Miller wasted no time getting to the point. "I hear my grandson was humiliated in class," he stated firmly, his voice steady, yet carrying an unmistakable weight.
Miss Whitmore attempted to interject, her voice shaky as she tried to downplay the incident. But James Miller was not about to be sidetracked. He pulled out a check from his pocket, placing it on the principal's desk with a deliberate thud. "Do you know who funded the school science lab?" he questioned, his gaze piercing through the room. The silence that followed was deafening. Principal Richardson swallowed hard, understanding the implications of James's words. He was acutely aware of the financial support the Miller family had provided for the school, and now he felt the pressure mounting. James's eyes locked onto Miss Whitmore, and he continued, "You think you have the right to humiliate my grandson just because he doesn't look like the other kids here?" As the tension escalated, Jacob stepped forward, a newfound strength radiating from him. "I don't need privileges. I just want to be respected like everyone else," he declared, his voice steady and unwavering. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Jacob's words resonated with the truth that had long been ignored. Miss Whitmore turned her gaze away, realizing that her authority had been challenged. The confidence she once wielded was crumbling under the weight of Jacob's defiance. James Miller glanced at her with a cold smile, then faced the principal once more. "My family doesn't need pity or special treatment. We only seek one simple truth. Respect isn't based on skin color or background. It's based on character." Principal Richardson nodded, recognizing the validity of James Miller's words. The atmosphere in the office shifted dramatically, and the power dynamics had irrevocably changed. Miss Whitmore's grip on the classroom had slipped, and now Jacob was no longer just the quiet boy in the back. He was a force to be reckoned with. As the meeting concluded, Jacob felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had stood up not only for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized. The storm that had begun with his decision to walk away from humiliation had culminated in this moment of empowerment. And as he walked out of the office alongside his grandfather, Jacob knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger movement towards change. As Jacob and his grandfather left the principal's office, the air buzzed with a newfound energy throughout Westfield High. Students whispered excitedly about the confrontation they had just witnessed, and the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Jacob's heart swelled with pride as he realized that he had not only defended his dignity, but had also sparked a shift in the school culture. James Miller's presence had brought a sense of authority that demanded respect, and the impact of his words echoed in the hallways. "You humiliated a child because of his background," James had said, his voice steady and commanding. Jacob recalled the way Miss Whitmore had faltered under his grandfather's scrutiny, her confidence unraveling as she faced the consequences of her actions. In the days that followed, the changes at Westfield High were palpable. Miss Whitmore, once a figure of unwavering authority, now approached her teaching with caution. The sharpness of her remarks had dulled, and the disdainful glances she used to cast upon Jacob were replaced with a reluctant acknowledgement of his presence. She no longer dared to call on him in class to humiliate him. Instead, she treated him like every other student. Jacob felt the shift as he walked into history class. The tension that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of quiet respect. His classmates no longer whispered behind his back. Instead, they offered nods of acknowledgement as he took his seat. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to Jacob. He had begun to carve out a space for himself in a world that had previously rejected him. During one particularly poignant class, Jacob raised his hand to answer a question about the Civil War. As he spoke, he felt the weight of history behind his words. He shared not just facts, but personal insights about the struggles of his ancestors, connecting the past to the present in a way that resonated with his classmates. The room fell silent, captivated by his perspective. For the first time, he felt their respect, not just for his knowledge, but for his courage to stand up and speak out. Meanwhile, the school administration took notice of the atmosphere change. Principal Richardson scheduled a meeting with the school board to review teaching methods and establish new protocols for addressing discrimination and promoting respect among students. Jacob's stand had set in motion a wave of reform that would ripple through the institution, and he felt a sense of responsibility to continue pushing for change. One afternoon, as Jacob sat in the cafeteria, he overheard a group of students discussing the recent events.
They reflected on how they had treated him, and although some still hesitated to speak out, Jacob sensed a shift in their willingness to confront their biases. He could see that they were beginning to question the status quo, and it filled him with hope. Ethan Carter, who had once been the embodiment of privilege and disdain, now sat quietly at lunch, surrounded by a growing distance from his former friends. The laughter that had once been directed at Jacob was now replaced by uncomfortable silence when Ethan was near. Jacob glanced over, and for the first time, he could see uncertainty in Ethan's eyes. The power dynamic had shifted, and Ethan was no longer untouchable.
As the weeks went by, Jacob continued to stand firm in his resolve. He became a symbol of resilience at Westfield High, inspiring others to find their voices as well. Students began to form support groups, sharing stories and experiences that had once been silenced. Together, they fostered an environment where respect and equality were not just ideals, but realities. Jacob knew that true change would take time, but he felt invigorated by the progress they were making. He was no longer just a boy from a farming family. He was an agent of change, a leader among his peers. And as he walked through the halls of Westfield High, he carried with him the belief that respect was not just something to be given, but something that had to be earned through courage, unity, and the determination to stand up for what is right. The day Jacob graduated from Westfield High was a momentous occasion, not only for him, but for the entire community. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he felt a swell of pride and accomplishment. The auditorium was filled with familiar faces, including his grandfather, James Miller, who stood in the audience with a warm smile, beaming with pride. Jacob scanned the crowd, noting the supportive nods from classmates who had once looked down on him, now recognizing his strength and resilience. Principal Richardson approached the microphone, his voice steady but tinged with reverence. Today, we honor a student who exemplifies not just academic excellence, but also the spirit of perseverance and courage. The applause that erupted in the auditorium was genuine, echoing through the hall as Jacob accepted his diploma. He had become a symbol of hope and determination, a beacon for those who had faced similar struggles. As he stood before the crowd, Jacob took a deep breath, preparing to address his peers. "I am not here today because of luck or privilege," he began, his voice resonating with conviction. "I stand here because I fought for myself, because I learned how not to bow down to what is wrong. Respect isn't something that is just given. It's something we have to earn." The room fell silent, every eye on him, hanging on to his words. "I didn't have the same opportunities as many of you," Jacob continued, his gaze steady. "But I never let that define my worth. I hope that those like me, those who felt they didn't belong, understand that no one has the right to determine your value. Only you can decide that." The audience erupted into applause once more, and Jacob felt their respect wash over him, a tangible recognition of his journey. After the ceremony, as he stepped off the stage, Jacob felt lighter than ever. He had not only reclaimed his dignity, but had also inspired others to stand up for themselves. He had shown that the fight for respect and equality was not just his battle, it was a collective struggle that united them all. In the days that followed, Jacob continued to engage with his community. He became involved in initiatives aimed at promoting diversity and inclusion within schools, sharing his story with younger students who needed to see that change was possible. Jacob was determined to ensure that no child would ever have to endure the same humiliation he had faced. He wanted to create a culture where respect was the norm, not the exception. James Miller often reminded Jacob, "We weren't born with privileges, but we can create our own path." Those words resonated deeply with Jacob as he navigated his new role as a leader. He understood that the journey was far from over. There was still much to be done, and he was ready to take on the challenge. As he walked through the familiar halls of Westfield High one last time, Jacob reflected on how far he had come. He was no longer the shy boy who had kept his head down, but a young man filled with conviction and purpose. He had proven that respect is not determined by one's background, but by one's character and actions.
Jacob's story had become a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing up against injustice. He had shown that change is possible and that every voice matters. With a heart full of hope and determination, Jacob Miller stepped into the future, ready to continue the legacy of strength and perseverance that had been passed down to him. And he knew that this was just the beginning of his journey.